Okay, welcome everyone to today's event sponsored by Bentham Science. Our attendees are filing in. I'm here with Dr. Gareth Dyke from Bentham Science. Dr. Dyke, how are you doing today?
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. All is well. How are you doing, Scott? Doing well.
Doing fantastically well. It's a little chilly day here in Tokyo. We went from summer to winter in about one day, but otherwise doing great.
Awesome.
Yeah, our guests are coming in now. And if you're just joining us now, if you're joining us for the first time, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know who you are, where you're from, or if you one of our return guests who've come to our events before. It would be great to hear from you again. Feel free to say hello, announce yourself. Don't be shy about using the chat window today. It's there for us to communicate. So please chime in, let us know who you are, where you're from. And we also have Q&A today with Dr. Dyke. He's going to share his expertise with us. So if you have questions about anything in the talk today, feel free to type them into the Q&A panel that's here on Zoom. We'll be gathering your questions, and at the end of the event today, we'll be answering as many questions as we can. So feel free to put your comments in the chat box and your questions in the Q&A box.
Everybody who joins us today will get access to a recording, right, Scott? And a certificate of attendance from this Bentham Science event. So that's good news.
Absolutely. We've already had a couple of questions and inquiries from guests about the certificates. Absolutely. We'll be providing certificates. It usually arrives about 24 hours after the event finishes. So check your inbox tomorrow for the certificate for today's event.
And we have a comment in the Q&A box that the chat box is not available to our guests today. So we just need to make that
Great. Let's fix that
change.
for you. Sorry, everyone. Let's make sure that you can all join the chat. I apologize. Just a
Fantastic.
moment.
Wonderful. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can build your academic brand and promote yourself as a researcher. That's our topic for today. Scott's going to say a few words about Bentham Science as we get started here.
Okay, we should have the chat box ready now. Let us know if you're able to post. Apologies, we had the settings a little bit too sharply private. Let's see if you can post. There we go. Fantastic. Okay, our first comment from Abrar. Thank you so much for posting there. Okay, I think we're ready to go for chats. Excellent. And welcome to the event today. It's sponsored by our colleagues at Bentham Science Publishers. Bentham is a leading science and technical and medical research publisher. More than 160 print and online journals, as you can see here, including hybrid and open access, and more than 1,300 online and print books. And Dr. Dyke, tell us a little bit more about what makes Bentham Science unique or special among publishers.
Bentham Science is a great publisher for you if you're looking for your outlet for your next piece of research. They only use double-blind peer review. So all of your research work is very carefully and expertly double-blind peer reviewed, which means that the editors at those Bentham journals, of which there are 166 open access and hybrid journals, they don't get involved in the peer review selection process. That's all done by a Bentham in-house manuscript management system that matches your paper with experts who, by the way, all have H indices higher than 5. So not only is your paper going to be expertly peer reviewed, it's going to be expertly peer reviewed by somebody with a high H index. So that's really, really unique within the publishing industry and something that's really worth keeping in mind. If you're a librarian and you're joining us today, have a look at this QR code. We'll show it to you again at the end of our event. By scanning this code, you can get access to a 3-month trial, access to all of the Bentham journals, all of the ebooks, 40 plus impact factor journals for 3 months, absolutely free, which means it will not cost you a single penny piece. You can access and discover cutting edge research and have a look at the kinds of content that Bentham has available for your researchers. Scott?
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Dyke. So any librarians who are joining us today, feel free to scan that QR code and check out the free offer. Well, I think our guests are filing in, Dr. Dyke. We've got a good crowd today. It's fantastic. People from everywhere Again, if you're joining us just now, feel free to announce yourself in the chat window. We're going to get started here in just a moment. So feel free to introduce yourself and say hello. And again, we'll be taking questions today, so feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can before the end of the event today.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about 3 very closely related aspects of promoting your research and building your brand as a researcher. So things to do before you publish your next paper, things to do after the paper gets published, and then we're going to give you our 12 top tips, the 12 steps to success as a researcher, publishing and promoting yourself, publishing and promoting your brand. Scott's going to be back and forth, number of polls, other questions for you, our audience today as well. And it's great to see so many people from all over the place, as Scott was just saying. It's fantastic. Do give us your name, do get in touch, do let us know where you're from, and we'll have lots of time for questions a little bit later on in our event as well. So let's get going. Let's get started. Let's begin our discussion of how you can promote yourself as a researcher, how you can build that brand so that people know about your research, people learn about your research, and people obviously are going to cite your papers a little bit more, which is absolutely fantastic and certainly something that everybody should be doing as a researcher throughout their careers. I didn't do that when I was a researcher, and I definitely regret it. So here's a roadmap to publishing success. We're going to talk about this. We're going to come back to this. We're going to lean on this throughout our event today. Beginning the process, you're preparing to write. You're thinking about how to do that. And we certainly have lots of other training, lots of other content around this preparing to write aspect of academic writing. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, we can send you other information. We can certainly also come along to your institution virtually, do a presentation about preparing to write, selling yourself to journals. Capturing an editor's attention is also extremely important. Many top-tier, high-impact factor journals reject 9 out of 10 of the papers that get submitted to them. So that's also super, super important. You need a structure before you begin the writing process. Having a clear structure means that your readers won't get lost in the writing. And of course, as well, Scott and I often do training sessions on effective English writing. So that's another part of the roadmap. We like to call it the escalator of excellence. You move up there from preparation, selling yourself, structuring your article, and then effective English writing as the components of your publication success. And also have a think before you begin your article writing process about your motivations for getting a paper published in the first place. I used to work with a guy years and years ago, many papers in Nature and Science. He told me once that he likes to publish research so that when he's dead, there'll be a legacy for future generations of researchers to look at his research output, and he'll have left something behind. That was his motivation for publishing his research. Yours might be different. As a PhD student, as a master's student, you want to get published to get funding or to get your degree potentially. You might want to get published to get promoted. You might want to get published to promote and develop research and development. But your motivations for writing and publishing your work quite different to those of editors and peer reviewers. And that's important to keep in mind when you put your papers together. When you write them up for publication, you are writing them for editors, peer reviewers, and readers. You're not writing your research papers for yourself or for members even of your own research team. It's important as a first stage, building that brand, building that relationship with the journals within which you publish your papers in order to ensure maximum success. And that's what we're all about, Scott and I, helping you to achieve your potential as a researcher. So here's some fun facts about your readers. They haven't got much spare time. Think about your own research day. How much time do you actually spend reading academic articles? People want to read papers as fast as possible. They get frustrated if they can't understand the contents of academic articles. And many of the papers that you pick up, that you read, will not be essential reading. So keep that in mind when putting your work together. Apply the kinds of easy to follow writing techniques that we often talk about to keep your English simple and easy to follow. And always remember that many of your readers, if not most of your readers, will not be native English speakers. When you talk about putting your papers together, this is very, very, very important, right, Scott? Don't you think so?
It's incredibly important, Dr. Dyke. And I was just working with a researcher here in Japan, incredible scientist, incredible science. And this particular researcher was very surprised when I explained that the more simple and readable your writing is, the better your research will promote itself. Because most of our readers are not native English speakers like yourself or myself, Dr. Dyke. People want readable research, and readable research means impactful research. So I often work with researchers to get them to simplify their language. If your science is very complex, your language should be even simpler so that people can understand it, not just people in your field of specialty, but also lay people and other people who might help you to promote your research. So that's a fantastic point that you raised, Dr. Dyke. I definitely agree.
And if you don't promote your research, then something is going to happen, and that's nothing.
Nothing.
So, I mean, don't be like me when I was a researcher, just writing and publishing papers and doing nothing to promote those papers so that the readership of your work increases. This is the point of this presentation today, building your brand as a researcher, developing that reputation, if you like, within your field and beyond, that people are going to want to read your research work when you publish it. That's very, very important. So we'll talk about this in a great deal of detail in this presentation, I hope. But what do we mean when we talk about academic branding? We're talking about your profile as a researcher. As I just mentioned, other workers, other researchers being able to recognize your work and wanting to read your papers, attend your conference presentations when you give them. So the positioning of your research within your field. So this presentation, it's all about maximizing your brand, building your profile as a researcher within your field and beyond. So let's have a look quickly about what let's have a look quickly at what impact actually is around the life cycle of a research project, from inputs, outputs, and outcomes, as well as societal benefits. Lots of researchers, me included, don't really think about the benefits that their research is having on the lives of ordinary people, on the outside world, on society, and so on. And this is very important in addition to what we like to call academic impact, which of course is the impact factor, the reputation, the readership, the citations of the journals and other outputs that you create as a researcher. So have a look at this wheel. Of course, we'll give you this presentation as a recording at the end, but this is a great way to visualize the kinds of things that you're doing as a researcher as you build up your impact around the life cycle of your research papers. And this is also very interesting to keep in mind because, as we mentioned already, your perceptions of impact and your motivations for publishing as a researcher are quite different to those of journal editors. They care more than you do even that your paper gets read and downloaded, but they might care far less than you do about the societal impact of your research outside academia. They just worry about the reputation of their journal. They just worry about how many people are going to cite, how many people are going to use the journal. So this is important as well. Perceptions of impact between authors, researchers, and journal editors, journal managers working at publishing companies for example. And so when we talk about maximizing our impact as researchers, we're really talking about two quite interrelated but nevertheless distinct aspects: academic impact, citations, readership, and so on, and economic and societal benefits of research. Okay, so these are ways to think about your impact as a researcher, the different kinds of impact that your work is having on the field. And overall, of course, impact is a measure of the good that researchers do in the world, right? So it's not just about impact factors, it's not just about journal publications, it's not just about your career. It's about the difference that you can make, the good that you can do in the world. So let's think about how we can maximize our impact, how you can do that, how you can build that into your brand as a researcher, as you build out your publication history, as you develop your publication track record over the course of your career. Impact, of course, though, for most academics is still measured by publications. For better or worse, good or bad, publications remain at the heart of academic impact. Researchers count papers, impact factors. We look at things like R and H indices, more on those in a minute. And your institution is going to count citations, circulation. But, how does your research circulation actually translate to impact? How many people are actually going to cite your work? And by way of illustration, I could publish a paper, let's say it gets accepted in Nature, fantastic, I'm going to have a big party to celebrate that. But what if nobody cites it? What if nobody uses it? What if I don't promote that publication so that other researchers know about it? And of course, the bigger the journal that you use, the bigger the impact factor of the journal that you publish in, the more people will, by default, learn about that research publication because there's more readers. A journal with a higher impact factor has, by definition, got more readers. But there's a promotional aspect that we can take responsibility for as well as researchers. And so returning to this concept of impact as a journey, have a look at this slide: inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. It's a great slide that we took from our friends at fasttrackimpact.com. This is a great way to think about your article, research, and project development. And it's a fantastic way of visualizing impact as a journey. Great to use in a variety of forms in, for example, grant applications or reports to your university. What are you doing to maximize the impact of your research, the branding of yourself as a researcher at the different stages? Whoops, I muted myself. Hope you didn't miss too much. Inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. How are we doing, Scott? Everything okay?
Doing great, Gareth. Doing great.
I muted myself by mistake. I'm
No
flailing
worries.
around,
We're back. We're
shouting
back.
and screaming. Research impact as a journey. And this is important as well to have a think about this, because you can do this in several ways as a researcher. You can write a paper, as in our example here, about the molecular genetics of tobacco, right? Publish that paper, and maybe a handful of researchers around the world will read it and cite it because it's about something that they're interested in, the very specific research area, molecular genetics of tobacco. But if you broaden your research topic and you talk in wider, more general terms about something that's much more interesting in a societal context, like the health detriments, like the issues with global health to do with tobacco farming, as that is influenced by the molecular genetics of tobacco, then you can make a much bigger impact. You can get your work published in much more impactful journals, and more people will read your work, more people will know about your work, and more people are going to cite your work in terms of ways of thinking about getting your work published and those all-important pathways to impact with your research. So we are talking in this presentation then fundamentally about reaching more readers, building our brand, getting our papers published and getting them out there so that more people read them. So people often ask us, Gareth and Scott, what's the secret to publishing a paper in a high impact factor journal? Well, we think that the answer, or one of the key answers to this question, is to make your topic broadly interesting to a global, multidisciplinary research audience. If you look at the kinds of papers that get published in high impact factor journals, they are widely applicable to lots of readers, lots of researchers. So read widely around your subject. Check news sites to see what's hot and what's not in science in your area. How are leaders, research leaders in your field, pitching their work to top journals? And you can learn from researchers that have come before. You can see how successful publishing researchers learn from their mistakes, how they pitch papers to big international journals. And as David Hockney said, you step back from your tight, narrowly focused PhD project, that tight piece of research that you're so obsessed about. You don't see the big picture. You don't see like the wider context of your research and why it might be interesting to lots of different people. Scott?
Yeah, these are fantastic points, Gareth. And one question probably the number one question that we get from all of our audiences at all of our events is, how do I write something that will be impactful? How do I write a more impactful paper? How do I reach more readers? And I think you covered it fantastically here. But we talk about the secret writing skill, and that is reading, simply just being aware of what's happening in your field, the kinds of impactful research that's around you. And yeah, by reading more and reading in a more focused way, that will actually inform our writing and make it easier for us to write impactfully ourselves. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And we're in a very exciting time, of course, because there are millions of different AI tools that you can apply to help, with the reading process, with the writing process, with the keeping up to date with literature process. So it's not like it was back in our day when we had to walk down to the library and actually go and leaf through the latest journals that had come out that week. This is much easier, I think, now. It's a really exciting time for researchers, especially non-native English-speaking researchers, in terms of all the different tools that are available. So it's important, and we're here to help you to make sure your research stands out. And that's the other key takeaway message from this first part of our presentation today. About 2 million papers published every year, about 30,000 in medical sciences every month. How are you going to make sure that your research, your great paper, stands out, that people are going to read it, that you develop that brand, that reputation as an excellent researcher? Well, the first step to keep in mind is, of course, which journal you're going to publish your work in. And many people, they don't start to write until they've decided on a target journal. They're talking to other people, they're talking to colleagues, they're making those pre-submission inquiries to journals, reaching out to journal editors with something that they've got finished from that project, and asking the editor of a suitable journal, would this be something you'd be interested in seeing published in your journal or not? And of course, this is a great strategy to adopt, to target journals with your research, to make sure that you have the best possible chance of publication in a decent high impact factor journal. And this is something that we talk about in other training sessions. We do whole sessions on journal selection. So do get in touch if you're listening to this and you'd like that kind of presentation for your research team, for your research group. There are a number of key things to think about when you select a journal. Is it accessible or not? Does it have an impact factor? And what does this mean? And is the journal peer-reviewed? Remember, we mentioned all of the Bentham Science journals, double-blind peer-reviewed. That's quite unusual in the publishing industry. That's an important consideration in terms of the reputation of the research that you publish. So impact factor, reputation, reach of your target journal in your field, and whether or not the journal will be open access or not, which is of course something we can come back to and talk about a little bit more in our Q&A later. But most researchers look for fast publications, at least as fast as possible. They look for journals with decent impact factors, and they want their publications to have a high reach and a wide as possible, large as possible readership, which is why many researchers like the idea of publishing their work open access. If you're wondering at this point about impact factors, by the way, what does that all mean? We put together this handy graphic to explain to you what a journal impact factor is and how it is calculated. Again, we'll send this presentation so you can have a look at this later. Basically, an impact factor is a measure of the number of articles published in that journal over the last 2 years, divided by the number that have been published with impact, with citations. So the number of citations and versus the number of articles published in that journal over the last 2 years. Clarivate Analytics, the company that produces and releases impact factors, does so annually, but the impact factors that you're looking at, so if you look at Bentham Science, for example, 40 journals of the 166 that Bentham publishes have impact factors. Those are actually impact factors from 2 years ago. Okay, that's an important consideration to keep in mind. But this is how it works. That's how impact factors get calculated. And as you will be very well aware, if you're working, for example, in humanities, in social sciences, I know Scott wants to jump in and make comments about this as a researcher in one of these subject areas. It's often quite difficult, right, Scott, to find a journal that's got an impact factor in some of these subject areas.
Indeed. Social sciences guy here, absolutely. For journals, it can be challenging for us. And speaking of impact factors, we have a very timely question from Benny in the audience. Do we have time for a question just now, Dr. Dyke?
Of course.
Benny's question, this is a great one. I was told a good impact factor varies by field, etc., as you're talking about just now. How do we assess what's a good impact factor? Your thoughts, Dr. Dyke?
Yeah, absolutely. Impact factors, of course, vary by subject areas, by areas of study. So in a particular area of study, and I don't know what your area of study is, Benny, perhaps you'll share that with us in the chat, but there will be, or there should be, a list of journals that researchers in your area would normally publish their work in. And if, you've probably got that in your head, like most researchers know, like in their particular field, there's a stack of journals where most of the research would normally get published. And those are your target journals. You should rank those by impact factor. And of course, some subject areas, like in my case, dinosaur paleontology, it's got a higher chance, right, of getting published in some journals than maybe some other areas of study, because some topics, unfortunately, are just better suited, I guess, to wide general readership than others. Climate change, for example, would be another topic that if you're working in that area, you've got a higher chance of putting your work into higher impact factor journals. One of the tricks here, by the way, is to identify the hook in your own research and make it relatable, make it relevant, make it into something that people are going to want to read about. So great question, Benny. In different subject areas, different lists of journals. And so, of course, like certain subject areas, publishing in an impact factor journal with a level like 3 is very good, very impressive. Whereas, in other fields, people would be aiming to higher impacts, let's say. But let's talk about that a little bit later in the Q&A as well. There's a coverage problem in different disciplines, as Scott was mentioning. And it's also important for us to note at this point, open access. What is open access? Of course, quick definition, open access publishing ensures that everything is accessible to everybody. And this has definitely changed a lot since the pandemic in terms of people's uptake of open access as a publishing model. There are 2 kinds. First one I'll mention is gold open access. That's where you put your paper into a journal or with a publisher that puts out just open access. MDPI, PLOS, Frontiers, big open access publishers. They're only publishing work that's accessible to everybody, but unfortunately, there's often a charge levied on authors for that publishing model. We call it the APC, the Article Processing Charge, and you'll be well aware of this if you've ever tried to publish a paper in one of these open access journals. On the other hand, green open access, that's where you publish in a traditional journal, no fee, but you put the final version of your draft of your paper onto a site like ResearchGate, onto your own website after an embargo period has passed. And that's usually 6 months or 9 months, depending on the journal, depending on your subject area. So the publication becomes open access over time. And that's also worth thinking about as an option for researchers to get their work out there and get their work known. Couple of tips for writing a highly cited paper. Does your journal publicize it? Can users access content? What are the key considerations for you in terms of building your academic authority? And it will be different for different subject areas, of course. But again, like, we're here, we can come back, we can visit your institution remotely, we can show up, we can parachute in, we can give presentations to your researchers if this is an area of interest, because we're trying to solve real practical research problems. We're thinking big, data over many years rather than just 1 year. We're publishing with other researchers who contribute to and complement our knowledge. And we're using a simple writing style. And that's something that we talk about a lot, Scott and I, in all of our presentations, building out the branding, building out the reputation for different researchers. You've got to have an ORCID ID as well. Very important so that you can be differentiated, you can be distinguished from other researchers. Many publishers now, many journals are requiring an ORCID ID when it comes time to make a submission. So make sure you have one of these as well. Well, that's the first bit. Before publication, we'll talk now about things to do after your paper gets published. And then we're going to give you, at the end of this presentation today, our 12-step program for maximizing article citations. How are we doing, Scott? Everything okay?
Doing great. I think it's time for a poll. Shall we try a poll?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to be asking our guests today about promotional channels for their research. So which channels have you used to promote your research? We've got Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Well, I guess we've got Twitter there twice, so let's call it X. We've got Twitter and X here separately, I guess. WeChat, Instagram, ResearchGate, or any other channels that you might have used. Which of these researchers have you used to promote your research?
I'm on LinkedIn all the time, Scott. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly promoting or trying to promote stuff on that channel, and I wouldn't really use any of the other ones, to be perfectly honest. Maybe WeChat a little bit, but that's just to keep in touch with people. What about you?
Right. I'm not really a huge social media guy, to be honest with you, although I encourage others to do so. If I'm going to post anything professionally, it's going to be on LinkedIn usually, but I do know others who post on these other channels as well. So I guess any way that you can find to communicate with people and communicate your research and find communities, then yeah, whatever works for you. Okay, answers are coming in hot. It looks like the big winners from this poll are, maybe not surprisingly, ResearchGate and LinkedIn. Great. Well, thanks everyone for answering.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, see you over on various social media channels in the not too distant future. I think that would be absolutely great. Do follow us on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, we'd love to connect with anybody listening to this. That'd be fantastic. Let's talk quickly about things to do after your paper gets published. What should you do to build your brand, promote your work after publication? Well, this is what I used to do. Absolutely nothing. And the top tip from this part of our webinar today is, of course, don't be like me. When you publish a paper, start to think about how you can promote that research so that more people are going to read it, more people are going to be able to monitor and measure your impact, so that when your institution comes back to you and asks, what have you done recently to promote yourself? How are you disseminating your research? How many citations have you gotten? You're going to be able to do that. And people promote usually at conferences, on social media, as we've just been talking about, and they use traditional modes like press releases, talking directly to the media. Promote your research, celebrate your research. Don't be like me. Don't just ignore branding, ignore research promotion. There are a number of absolutely fantastic tools out there that enable us to measure the impact of our research in real time. And one of the most famous is this tool, Altmetrics. You can have a look at this. You can see if papers that you've published are signed up through journals and publishers to this tool. But basically, the little colors on the Altmetrics wheel, as you can see here, give you outputs from different channels. You can see that this paper has been cited more than 1,000 times. It's appeared, I should say, more than 1,000 times online in different places, news outlets, blogs, tweets, Facebook pages, and so on and so forth. Lots of publishers use Altmetrics. It's a great tool that keeps us up to date with the real-time impact of our research. And as Scott mentioned as well, sites like ResearchGate are fantastic as well. Academic social networks, great ways to disseminate and build your reputation, and as well building your CV without really doing all that much work. ORCID is great for this. You set up a profile, put in a little bit of information about yourself. It imports articles from all over the place, builds a publication list for you, and keeps track of what you've published without you necessarily having to do it. So share research, build connections, but don't upload PDFs, green open access, until that embargo period has ended. And here's a bit of information about some of those pesky embargo periods at the major publishers. If you've published a paper with them and it's in one of their traditional journals, no fee for you to publish there, but you can't promote, you can't put the work out onto the wider internet until after an embargo period has passed. So you can see here the different publishers have different embargo lengths. Before you publish in Nature, for example, or with one of the Nature portfolio journals, after 6 months, you can then post the PDF of the final published article on a site like ResearchGate. That's green open access. Don't forget about press releases. Very important way to talk about your research as well. It's a bit more traditional, but for sure, your institution, your university, your medical school will have a press office helping you to get the word out about your work. It builds your visibility, it increases downloads and citations, and you've really got a responsibility to do this as a researcher because of where your funding is coming from. Most of us get funding from the government, from taxpayers, so we must be giving back, communicating about our research with the public, with the people who paid for it in the first place. So this is all an important part of building your brand, disseminating your research, because most funding is a public endeavor. We get support. We must inform people about the work that we've done. That's very important. Again, don't be like me. Don't just ignore it. You've got to get out there, build your brand, get your research known about in the wider public. Remember those slides that we showed you before with all of the different stages of research impact as a journey? This is also very important. Citation analysis, just quickly, it's a way of measuring the impact of an author, an article, or a publication, as we've discussed, by counting the number of times that's been cited by other works. After publication, you can do this, but it takes quite a while for research citations to start building up about the papers that you've published. Google Scholar is one great way of keeping track of this, but it takes a lot of time for those citations to build up. Better tools, more immediate tools like Altmetrics help us as well. And we must boost our citations because readers are key in academic publishing. Citations, that's a measure of use, that's a measure of readership, it's a measure of your academic impact. And it's the key way that academics get assessed still around the world, like it or not. So we look at citation analysis. Who's citing our work? Who's cited particular papers that we've written? What's the most cited paper in my subject area? Very important to know that. Very good idea to have that information. This helps you, by the way, Benny, to determine which are the best journals in your field. And of course, universities, research councils, funding agencies use these kinds of data to justify hiring decisions, to justify appointments, as well as requests for funding. So very important to know about citation indices, even if you don't like them, right, Scott? People still need to know about them to maximize their success as researchers.
Absolutely. And maybe this is a great time to ask our guests some questions about the kinds of citation analysis tools that they might have used for their research. Let's try a poll, shall we? Okay, our poll is, which citation analysis tools have you used? The options here are Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar, ORCID, or other.
Yeah, like Altmetrics, maybe. If you've had access to that tool, perhaps. Maybe you've looked at the success, the performance of a paper that you've published on Altmetrics. So if you've done that, click the other button, because that, of course, contains lots of information other than just citations. And remember, citations take at least 2 years to build up for a journal to gather its impact factor. So that's important to keep in mind as well.
Okay, answers are coming in. Looks like, wow, Google Scholar seems to be the big winner amongst these choices, at least. Web of Science, 48%. Let's just share the results here. Web of Science, 48%. Scopus, 36% of our guests have used Scopus. 79% have used Google Scholar, 27% ORCID, and 6% some of those other citation analysis tools. Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, everyone.
Really. Some of these require subscriptions, right? So you won't be using Scopus, Web of Science if you're not inside of a university that has a subscription for those kinds of tools, for example, whereas Google Scholar, very popular because it's freely available. These tools enable us to gather data on the impact of journals, as well as assessing particular areas of research, activity, and publications. Remember, we mentioned that list of journals that you should have in your subject area, ranked by impact factors, aiming high with your publications, hoping to get your work published in better journals if possible. ORCID, Google Scholar, Web of Science, and Scopus are the top 4 ways that researchers do this around the world at the moment. Here's my Google Scholar. I'm not looking at it all that often, but it's a great way. Again, if you've got a Google Scholar profile, if you haven't, you should have one. It builds up that track record for you. So if you need to go for a job, you need to write up your resume for a grant application, you can do a lot of that work using ORCID and using Google Scholar as the basis for what you need to put together for your application. So very, very, very good idea to have a Google Scholar profile. People will look at your Google Scholar profile when you're being considered for funding or when you're being considered for a job application, for example. Our impact checklists, very important to keep in mind. What are you doing during the project, on publication, and on an ongoing basis in order to maximize other people's knowledge, other people's awareness of your research? And of course, as we talked about already, you need to have those promotional channels. If you're a little bit older like me and Scott, then maybe it's going to be LinkedIn or email. But if you're, using Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, where are the other researchers in your field hanging around online? You can target your content into those groups and make sure that your content makes a difference. And this is why, by the way, that it's also important to work on your public engagement skills, because as we've discussed, you need to be able to explain the value of your research. When people ask you, why is your research important? What are you working on? You need answers to those questions that are easy to understand for anyone. You need to justify your funding, perhaps by showing, demonstrating, arguing its impact. So you can get better at this. You can learn to be better at public engagement. You can learn to communicate more effectively. And we always like to say that telling a story is one of the best ways to communicate about anything, and that is especially true for research. Remember my example about molecular genetics of tobacco? How boring would it be if you just talked about that research? What about some stories? What about some things that happened in the lab or in the field while the research was going on that people can relate to, that people will find interesting, that will help you to develop your presentation skill set? And you're going to be doing this when your article is published at conferences, of course, where you network, where you get to identify new trends in your research area and others. Lots of conferences went online, of course, but now, of course, we're back out there. We're talking to people, networking, and bringing our research out there to the public and explaining its value. One of the best ways to build your brand as a researcher and get much, much, much more impact is to collaborate. This is the secret for many successful researchers publishing lots of papers, by the way. They're collaborating to increase their reach and citation. You can see some work that's been done on this slide that shows the scientific basis for this. But of course, if I write a paper with Scott and it gets published, our networks will know about it. But that's just 2 people. If we write a paper with 20 other co-authors, then that automatically increases the pool of people and the networks amongst the pool of those people who are going to learn about our research. So collaboration, by the way, is a very, very, very good idea, not just for your career, but also for building your brand as a researcher. Scott, how are we doing?
Doing great here, Gareth. And just to an add on to that tip you just made, it's a fantastic tip. And we're not advocating, of course, gift authorship, adding a bunch of authors to your paper so that you can then promote your paper better. Of course, Dr. Dyke is talking about, of course, legitimate collaboration with other authors and building your author list legitimately. Lots of great questions coming in, Gareth. So maybe we'll save a bit of time at the end here for our Q&A. Yeah, do we have time for a couple of questions now, Gareth? Or did you want to head on to another topic, or?
Let's do 1 or 2 questions now, shall we, quickly?
Great. Okay, let's open up the chat here. So a couple of questions about promotional channels. So question from Benny, what are the best tools for, excuse me, Benny, maybe you can clarify your question. How do you get access to alt metrics, I think is the question from Benny. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you should have access to this when you publish a paper that uses Altmetrics. So for example, if you publish a paper with one of the big publishers, once your article is accepted and published, then you'll see on the PDF or on the website where the paper is, the Altmetrics tool that's giving you the information about that particular article. You'll need a subscription if you actually want to look at lots of papers. Maybe your institution has one. Let's check that. Let us know where you're working. We can check up on that information for you and get back to you after the event today. But thanks for the question.
Yeah, great question, Benny. And thanks for clarifying. So Benny's question was other citation analysis tools. There was that other category there. And you mentioned altmetrics, of course. Dr. Dyke, any others that you would recommend, or from that list, which citation analysis tools would you strongly recommend?
There are very many. And now we're seeing like lots of AI related tools coming out that do this for us, like Scholar AI, for example, that's providing this kind of quick and effective and very, very rapid way to search citations. We'll send you a list. If you drop us a message after the event, Benny will send you a list of these tools so that you can have a look. Okay, thank you for that question. Great.
Great, thanks, Benny. And also from the chat, I'm just going to scroll up a bit here. And I think we've addressed most of these questions. Yeah, if anyone else has questions, drop them into the chat or the Q&A. Another question from Benny here. Thanks for your questions, Benny. The question is, One of the challenges I see for people new to the research area is there's so much going on in AI that if you try to read everything, you may lose focus. How do you deal with that? Oh, the overwhelm. How do we deal with the information overwhelm, Dr. Dyke?
Stay
Great question.
connected with me and Scott. Stay connected with us because, like, you know, this is exactly what we're doing. And there are many other people as well, like on LinkedIn, for example, who are providing digested versions of AI tools. So again, Benny, get in touch with us. We'll give you a list of people to follow, things to look at. But yeah, I agree. Like if you try to read all of this information for yourself, keep up to date with even the new GPTs that are coming out almost every day, you're gonna like spend nothing, you're gonna do nothing else apart from like do that and keep up to date with that. But it's not to worry, like there are other people who are doing that for you. So again, lots of resources, lots of places where you can look. And once again, like do get in touch with us. We'll provide you with that follow-up information at the end of our session. Let me just quickly run through our 12 steps for success in terms of maximizing your citations. And then we'll be back with a few more questions at the end of this event in just a few minutes. 12 ways to boost your citations, shown here in this fantastic graphic created by our wonderful graphic designer. She's called Kasturi Kankonkar. You'll find her also on LinkedIn. 12 steps for making sure that your articles achieve maximum citations when you write your work up and get it published. Tip number 1 is choosing carefully your keywords. Very important for search engine optimization. You're going to need to do this carefully. We don't have time to talk about this in detail, but do get in touch. We've got other presentations, other webinars that we'd love to give on this exact topic. If that's something that's of interest to you, reach out to us at the end. Choosing your keywords carefully, using the same name on all your papers. Gareth J. Dyke, GJ Dyke, Gareth Dyke. Get an ORCID ID so that all of your different research papers, potentially using different combinations of your name, will be attributable to you. That's very, very important. Tip number 3, as we've been talking about today, dissemination and promotion of your research. It's a journey. Don't just do this when the work is published. Talk about your work all the time. Talk about your work on your blog, talk about it on your website as you are doing it. It's a journey over time. We've talked quite a lot about this in our presentation today. Tip number 4, cite within reason your previously published papers. Don't just cite only your own work. You need a balance to your reference list. You need a balanced set of citations, but you should do this when and where appropriate to build your own track record and build your own citation record. Tip number 5, do publish your work in journals that other people in your field read. We've talked about this before. There isn't any point in publishing a paper in a journal that nobody in your research area ever looks at. Make sure that you are doing effective journal selection and ensuring that your audience is engaged with you as a researcher. Tip number 6, do try to publish in open access journals if you can. Very important. Most academic authors support open access. It gives much, much more reach to readers. You'll get more citations. There's a cost factor. We've talked about that a little bit as well. Do get in touch with us. We have a whole webinar on journal selection that we'd love to come to your institution and do. That's tip number 6, publishing in OA journals if possible. Tip number 7, write review papers. These are key to career development, but they cannot be written before you've built up some primary literature of your own first. Lots of young researchers talk about writing review papers. They're different to literature reviews. You need to establish a bit of a reputation in your field before you can write a review paper. But it's a great way, of course, to boost your citations. You can cite lots of your own previous work. You need to tee them up, though. You need to get in touch with journal editors before you begin the writing process. Tip number 8, submit to special issues. Bentham has loads of them. do get in touch with the Bentham team if you'd like to learn about making a submission to a special issue. Conferences organized by senior colleagues. Key questions that get proposed to journals. That's tip number 8. Tip number 9, collaborate. Work with others. As we already mentioned, this is your key to a successful research career. More publications, more opportunities. That's tip number 9. Tip number 10, higher impact factor journals garner more citations. You're targeting your work to be effective as a researcher. Tip number 11, a comprehensive reference list. We talked about this already. You need that to be looked at in a trusted way in the research community, to have a good handle on what's been previously written across your field. And tip number 12, be smart with your title. Get people interested in reading your paper with an effective, interesting, eye-catching, alluring, enticing title. That is very, very important. In your title, the main issue, the main subject, accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations. Attract people's attention and keep it short. Studies have shown that shorter titles are likely to be more highly cited. We put a few examples into the end of this presentation. We'll give you this, of course, as a recording. You can have a look at this in your own time a little bit later. And do, of course, reach out to Scott and I if you'd like us to come back and give another presentation on any of the other topics that we often do. But communication is key, maximizing your success. Any questions or any issues, we are always here to help. Scott.
Great talk as always, Dr. Dyke. Thank you as always for sharing your insights. And I want to do a very quick poll just before we answer the final questions here. And I'm curious to see if people feel any more confident about promoting their research to the public. Now that they've heard your talk and they've heard your insights, Dr. Dyke, let's see how people feel about it. So let's do a very quick poll. How confident do you feel, our guests, about communicating your research to the public? Very confident, somewhat, not very, or terrified.
It's like public speaking, isn't it? You can learn to get better at these kinds of things. So, practice makes perfect and all that.
I think it's a dual edge, because people, maybe early career researchers, maybe we don't feel confident in the research itself. And then on top of that, it's the whole process of promoting ourselves that's also quite daunting and scary. So those two things together. But I think as we continue and as we gain experience, I think we get more confident and comfortable with both of those things, both the research, the body of research itself, and also the way that we're promoting our research.
Some cultures, some groups of people are just more inclined to boast about themselves, to talk about themselves. That's also true. Like lots of people that I meet around the world are just shy. They don't want to talk about themselves. And they may feel that that's boastful. That's not a particularly good trait in any case. But as Sadia says in the chat, very well timed, if you don't blow your trumpet, who will? Great. Yeah, that's true. Maybe your parents, but other than that.
Indeed, indeed. So we've got some confidence growing amongst our audience here today. That's great. 21% say they're very confident, 61% say somewhat, 18% not very confident. And I'm happy that nobody said terrified. That's absolutely great. Well, maybe we've got time for one last question, Dr. Dyke. What do you think?
Definitely, of course. Always time. Love
Maybe
your
we can
comment,
squeeze
Benny.
in one more. Yeah, this is a great point. This is also from Benny. And this goes back to the point that we shared earlier, that you shared, Dr. Dyke, which was about the more you collaborate, then the more potential promotional avenues that you have, because you simply have more authors collaborating on that project. And Benny asks, I was told if you add too many co-authors, then you may lose value accredited to you. So how do you manage this minimum contributions of co-authors when you're collaborating with a number of authors? And for Benny's field, for example, he works in medical AI, and he said in his field, doctors are super busy. Any thoughts on this, Dr. Dyke?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I mean, of course, like you see these papers with hundreds of co-authors. I mean, who's going to ever like even notice like the co-authors on the paper? I mean, it totally depends on the field, totally depends on the research project. I would say though, at least in science areas, like being first author or being last author on a collaborative project would be the key positions to try to be in. I mean, if you're first author, that means that you've led the project, you've done most of the research, right? Like you could be a young researcher, but this is your project, this is your topic, this is your research area. The last author is often the lab group leader or the person who maybe funded the project or developed the research team, something like that. And that's a common way of looking at multi-authored papers, at least in medical sciences, biological sciences, chemistry, and fields like that. So yeah, we have lots of other presentations. If you've not seen our presentation on publication ethics, Scott was talking earlier about gift authorships and what they are. Do get in touch because we'd love to kind of parachute in to your institution and give these presentations to you. And ethics is one that we do quite often. Thank you for all the great comments. It's really really nice to see. Thank you.
Yeah, our guests today were fantastic. Wonderful comments and a great atmosphere. So thanks everyone so much for joining us today. And thank you, as always, Dr. Dyke. I learned so much from you sharing your knowledge with us. And thanks to our guests. It was a really great session. So thank you, Gareth, and thanks to our guests again. And on behalf of Bentham Science, thanks again, everyone. And we'll be sending out a mail tomorrow within about 24 hours that's got the link to the complete video and also a certificate for participating today. So thanks, everyone. And any final words, Dr. Dyke?
Don't forget to scan the QR code if you're a librarian. I'll show this to you again. Like you can get free access to all of the Bentham content. That's there on the screen. So scan, scan, scan away, either now or when we send you the video recording. And of course, lots of social media channels as well. You can follow Bentham on a variety of different platforms or email them directly at marketing@benthamscience.net if you've got a specific question about any of the journals or submitting a paper to any of the Bentham titles. Thank you so much, Scott, for being a wonderful colleague.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks to you, Dr. Dyke. Have a great day, everyone.